Some of the problems that we're going to work through in this section, 10.5, deal with multiplying conjugates. Now, long ago we had developed a rule for this, but let's just do that again. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to take, just multiply through. So the first and the first, that'll give us an a squared. Then the outer product is positive a times negative b is negative ab. Then the inner product is positive b times positive a is also going to be a positive ab. And then the last and the last, positive times negative is negative, and b times b is b squared. And you can see that these middle terms cancel, and we're going to be left with a squared minus b squared. So now we have a quick rule for making this multiplication. If we have conjugates, we're going to maybe identify this one. Square the first, put a minus sign, square the second. So you square the first, put a minus sign, square the second. And that minus sign comes from right here, right? The last and the last. So here's a quick example. If we had, say, x plus 4 and x minus 4, what we're going to do here is we're going to square the first, getting x squared, put a minus sign, and square the second, getting 16. So to start this section off, let's take a look at problem number 1. We have x plus square root of y and x minus square root of y. These are conjugates, and we have our shortcut rule, our quick rule for conjugates. We're going to square the first, right? So maybe identify this factor here. We'll square the first, getting x squared, put a minus sign, and now square the second. Now when you square a square root, that radical is going to come off. I'm going to write it this time so that you can see it, but I'm going to take that second term and square it. But you know, from work we've done, if you square a square root, that radical comes off, so we get x squared minus y. So let's move on to number 3. Now in number 3, we've got conjugates. Square root of c plus square root of d, square root of c minus square root of d. So we've got conjugates. We can use our quick rule for doing this. Now I'm going to draw out what you're actually thinking. It's going to be you square the first, right? So maybe we'll identify this factor here. I'm going to square the first. So square the first, put a minus sign, then I'm going to square the second, right? I'm squaring the second here. Now this is something that you could probably do in your head. So when you square the first, when you square a square root, the radical comes off, you get c, there's the minus sign, and when you square the second, the radical comes off, and you get a d. Now also in this section, we're going to make a multiplication that we've done before, and we're going to use, again, our shortcut rule for doing this. If we have something like this, a binomial squared, well, let's actually develop this so we can remind ourselves of how the rule goes. This is really a plus b times a plus b, and then when we make the multiplication, the first and the first is an a squared. The outer product here is ab. The inner product is another ab. And the last is a b squared. Now what we've got are two of those. So what we're going to have is a squared plus two of those ab's plus a b squared. So there's our quick rule for this. So our quick rule is going to be, look at this, we're going to take the first one and square it. So we'll square the first. Then how did we get this? AB. You multiply these two together, multiply it by 2, so that's doubling it. So here's how I say this. I'm going to square the first, I'll multiply these two together and double it, and then b squared, I'm going to square the last. So square the first, multiply the two together, double it, square the last. And here's a simple example. Suppose that we have x plus 4 squared. What we're going to do here is square the first, multiply the two together. So multiply these together, I'll get 4x, but double it, 8x, and then I'm going to square the last, plus 16. So let's apply this rule to this binomial that we're going to square. So we're going to square the first. So I'll write this one out so we can see everything, but you might be able to do this part in your head. Here's what you're thinking anyway. You'll square the first, then you multiply these two together. So we're going to multiply these two together. Now positive times negative is going to be negative square root of x times square root of y, but you double it, so you get 2 square root of x square root of y, and then you square the last. Now, if you're thinking negative square root of y, you square the negative, you get a positive. So this is going to be positive square the last square root of y squared. Now let's simplify this. When you square a square root, right here, when you square a square root, the radical comes off. You get x minus, and now we've got both square roots, so we're going to multiply right under that radical. Minus 2 times the square root of xy, and then plus y. Now here in number 7, we just have a straight multiplication. We're going to just distribute here. So when we do that, we'll get square root of 2 times square root of 8. Let's just write that. That's going to be the square root of, well, we can just do this, 16, right? Minus, now in this case, the 2 is under the radical, the 4 is out, so they're going to stay that way. So we're going to have 4 square roots of 2, and we can simplify square root of 16 to this. We're going to get 4 minus 4 square roots of 2.